got folks from all around Kentucky and a few from even out. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour. And I'm going to start off our nonprofit, the Organic Association of Kentucky. My name is Jenny, and this brief intro that I'm going to share with you, we'll just take a few slides, and then I'm going to pass the mic over to Maggie Bowling from Old Homeplace Farm. We at Oak are a membership-based nonprofit organization. We've got about 400 members made up of farmers and local food advocates, allied professionals, and others interested in supporting our mission of advancing organic regenerative agriculture to improve the health of the environment in our communities. We're dedicated to growing ecological resilience, economic viability, and socially just futures for Kentucky farmers through our technical, educational, and market resources. These field days are an example of that. They're typically on-farm events, and we've been doing them virtually for the last year or so. We have an organic farming conference that's annual, and in 2022, it will be our 11th annual of those conferences. We have an online Find a Farm directory, and these listings promote some of our Oak member farms to Kentuckians who are seeking to connect with local farmers and to find healthy foods. And so we do offer consumer education in addition to this farmer education. We have a Kentucky Farm Share Coalition that promotes CSAs from organic member farms. And we have an organic transition trainer program, which is free technical assistance to our Oak members in their preparations for organic certification. And I'll mention that more in a bit. You can learn monthly e-newsletters, so make sure you're signed up for those. For those of you just joining us, we're going to share a couple of slides of intro, and then we'll get into talk with Maggie Bowling. You should have a full screen view of the PowerPoint here, and then a thumbnail. As the active speaker, you can move me around, or you can show the gallery view to yourself if you'd like that as well. We are recording, and we'll make this available not only as a recording, but also as a PDF with links to all the resources in there. So please submit any questions you have in the Zoom chat. We are grateful today to have funding from Grow Appalachia, who's supporting us, as well as the USDA. And we couldn't do it without partners like these. And as our field day today highlights a farm in transition to organic certification, we wanted to share a few major resources for your consideration. If you're interested in pursuing organic certification, Oak does have that organic transition trainer program, and these folks can help you in preparing for certification from your record keeping and your application, but also on the ground operations in your production systems. We've worked with over 144 Kentucky farms over the past 4 years through this program, and it is technical assistance that's free to Oak members. The Kentucky Department of Agriculture is one of the certifiers that consider using the majority of our organic operations throughout the state. Through them or through another certifier, there is 50% federal cost share back on your organic certification fees. Wanted to highlight that when we're talking about the regulations for organic certification, it is through the National Organic Program at USDA. It's a federal regulatory program that develops and enforces uniform national standards for organically produced agricultural products sold throughout the US. So within these NOP regulations, which are available online, we're going to highlight a lot of them today. And The one you see here, the 205.202, is an example of that, where organic lands must have distinct defined boundaries. So each of these NOP, or National Organic Program references, is in an orange link. These link directly to the regulations and practices addressed in that slide. And again, you'll get a PDF with all of those references that'll be easy for you to move through at your interest. So that's the overview. But what you've really come for today is our friend Maggie Bowling, who has shared a lot of her information of beginning farming from Old Homeplace Farm in Clay County. So I'll pass the mic to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Maggie and I farm in Clay County, Kentucky, and I have 2 acres in vegetable production, including 2 high tunnels, which are included in that 2 acres. And I raise vegetables year round, although my main harvest season, where I'm really selling the bulk of my vegetables, is between May and December. And I do not quite have my growing figured out to really bridge that gap to have a lot of produce available in winter and early spring, mainly in the early spring. And we also do have a livestock operation where we raise grass-fed beef, pastured pork, pastured eggs, and have sheep and goats. My husband was already raising livestock with his dad and selling it when I met him. And I have a background in vegetable production. I grew up on a certified organic vegetable farm. And so we joined together to add vegetables to the existing livestock operation. But I'm just going to talk about vegetables today. And that's what I know the most about. We started adding vegetables in 2014 was our first season. And from 2014 to 2016, I was pretty much the only laborer on the farm for vegetables. I had some hired help that was fairly inconsistent. And then in 2017, I did hire someone for 24 hours a week to help me. And then in 2018 through 2020, I hired someone to help me 40 hours a week from April through the end of September. And this spring, so far this spring, I have had someone with me 45 hours a week. And starting this week, I have 60 hours of help a week. And I probably am going to increase that and hire another person that's going to work with me through the summer and through the fall. But I think a pretty big barrier for me in growing has honestly been not having enough labor and being too scared financially to hire people. And I think I could have been a lot happier and less worn out, and probably grown and did better with my systems if I would have started out with more help earlier on. I think 2020 was a year where I really figured out how much help I needed. And so far this year has gone a lot more smoothly. And these are just a picture of some of our crop offerings. We grow just about any vegetable you might think of on the farm. And we also raise cut flowers as well. We do not raise sweet corn or potatoes for sale. So those are my 2 caveats to things we don't grow, but otherwise, we're growing a pretty wide variety in our 2 acres. So in 2014 was our first season, and trying to figure out how we wanted to sell things, I did not want to do a CSA. I felt that put way too much pressure on me as a first-year farmer. And I really wasn't sure, could I grow anything? I don't know. And at that time, there were not a lot of very consistent farmers markets in Eastern Kentucky, but I really did want to sell where I live at. And so we thought we would try selling things on an online store. And so we created an online store that season, and people could go on and purchase as little or as much as they want each week. They didn't have to purchase every week. It was just an online store. And we delivered to a few counties surrounding Clay. And the Clay County Farmers Market also started in 2014. So from 2014 to 2018, we sold through the online store and we sold at the Clay County Farmers Market on Saturdays. But in 2018, we had a brainstorming session with our existing customers. We had a big pizza party, and I kept getting the feedback that a lot of times people did not want to have to think about what to order, and they just wanted me to bring them vegetables and they didn't care what they were. And this really blew my mind that people wanted less choice. That's not what I thought people wanted. So in 2018, we put up like mystery veggie bags, Maggie's farm mystery bags on the online store. And I was blown away by how many people would choose that mystery bag almost every week off the online store. So that really put in my mind that maybe our customers and we were ready to transition into a CSA. So in 2019, I did the online store as usual. We started selling to the Wrigley Tap Room in Corbin, and we had a 10-member CSA that year. And I quit going to any farmers markets. And we also kind of expanded our cut flower production in 2019 to sell through some retail stores. And yeah, the CSA went really well that year. So 2020 really was our tipping point in our scaling up of our business and also transitioning to do more of a CSA. So we did a 45-member summer CSA share and a 45-member fall CSA season, and sold to restaurants and I guess mostly focused on CSA. And after feedback and just working on some marketing things this year, we're now doing 75 shares this summer, as well as our online store. And we will probably try to do a 75 or 100 member fall CSA as well. We are delivering to 5 East Kentucky counties currently. We go to Whitley County, Laurel County, Clay County, Leslie County, and Perry County. And we also sell to North Fork Fresh Stop Market, which is a sliding scale CSA based on the Fresh Stop Market model in Louisville. And we're harvesting for that today. And it's a 50-member sliding scale CSA. So that's a little bit of how we've grown and how we're marketing our items in Eastern Kentucky. And we are not yet certified organic, but we are working on transitioning to organic certification. And we have never used anything in our vegetable production that is not part of organic guidelines. But when we purchased our property in fall of 2013, the previous landowner had rented out our farm to someone that had raised traditional row crop corn down here in 2013. So we did have to do the minimum 36-month transition period before we could even think about applying for organic certification. I mean, not think about, but before we could apply. So we did work with a oak transition trainer, which I would highly recommend to anyone wanting to get certified organic. I grew up a certified organic farm, and so I was a little bit familiar with what my parents had to do on their farm, but working with transitioner trainer really helped me think about what record keeping I need to keep track of and how to do my organic system plan. So this is examples of some of the things that are part of the organic system plan. And this is a list from KDA of some of the records that you need to keep for getting inspected for organic certification. And this has honestly been probably my biggest barrier in applying for organic certification, is taking time to actually fill out the paperwork, which I know would not be that hard if I just did it. But I also have trouble, especially in the heat of the summer and not having enough help, as I mentioned before, keeping really good records. But Oak transition trainers can help you with that and help you with some templates of how to keep your records that might work for you. And I mean, they really are records that you should be keeping anyway, so that you know how profitable you are, what you put in your field, help you with crop rotation. So they're all records we should be keeping, but for me, it has been challenging to keep proper records. So these are examples of soil fertility and nutrient management that I'm using on my farm that are for organic farming, but I do use cover crops in my field. There's a picture of my rye and vetch and turnips from earlier this spring. We do purchase organic compost from Thoroughbred Landscape Products, and of course soil testing, which has really helped me out. And this is a photo of me tilling in our field, but we have over the last 8 years tried to be tilling and moving towards more minimal tillage practices. I've been pretty inspired by people that are doing that. But I do think farming is a continual learning process and just working towards that over time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I prep all of my beds. I have a permanent raised bed system in my field. And there are like two main ways that I grow fields in all of my beds. And I'm going to talk about using cover crops and stale seed bedding first. So here on the screen, there's me standing in my cover crops this spring. That's a mix of vetch, rye, and daikon radishes to create some soil biomass and nitrogen and help break up the soil with the radishes. And then I flail mow my cover crop down. And sometimes we'll talk about in crop rotation later, if I don't have a big cover crop like this, I might have overwintered crops, or even if I'm just flipping over beds, right now in the heat of the summer, how I'm getting rid of cover crop or any crop residue is with a flail mower. And so here's a video of me flail mowing it down. So the day that I mowed this down, this was about as tall as me, and I'm 5'4", and it just took it right down and chopped up in tiny pieces. And so I love flail mower. It's not a piece of equipment I started out with, but is something that has made my life a lot easier. And now I would say is one of the essential tools on my farm. So if I have a cover crop or any crop residue in a bed, I'm going to mow it down with my flail mower, and then I cover it with silage tarps, and that will really help the material decompose under the tarps a lot more quickly. Depending on the time of year, it's going to take different amounts of time. When it's cold outside, it might take a couple of months. This time of year, especially if it's not a lot of residue, it might only take 2 or 3 weeks. And then if there's a little bit of residue, I can plow that under or till it in, but I'm trying to let earthworms and nature decompose that underneath my tarps. Then I would take those tarps off. I would probably till my beds or reshape them up with a rotary plow, depending on how soft those specific beds are. And then I will put a tarp back on top of them. And this time of year in the warm months, I would keep a silage tarp on top of my prepped bed that has been tilled. If I'm going to add compost to that bed, I would till it, reshape it with a rotary plow, put compost on. Then I put my silage tarps back on my bed for a minimum of 2 weeks. Then when I take off that silage tarp, there's going to be a ton of little like white thread weeds underneath the tarp, which you can kind of see in this flame weeding picture right here on the bottom of your screen, where they're underneath that tarp and it's really warm and moist. The weeds all sprout, but then it's dark, so they get all white and weak and they can't really grow. If you would just leave that tarp on there for 4, 5, 6 weeks, those weeds would eventually not be able to grow and they would die. But a flame weeder helps you move your tarps off your beds faster so you can get planted in them. So I'll take my tarp off, all those white thread weeds will be on the bed. I'll run my flame weeder over the beds, which will kill all of those weeds. And then I will direct seed with my earthway seeder or transplant directly into those beds. So, and then the other way that I'm prepping beds is if I'm going to be transplanting something into landscape fabric. So a lot of crops I'm transplanting, and if I'm transplanting it in, and it's something that's over 6 inches apart in a bed, I'm going to plant it into landscape fabric usually. And if I'm direct seeding it or planting something like beets or green onions, a transplants that's really close together in a bed, I'll put them in a bare soil bed after a stale seed bed method. But landscape fabric allows me to skip that whole really lengthy tarping flame weeding stale seed bed technique. And then after the landscape fabric's on, I don't have to worry about weeding the beds anymore. So to do the landscape fabric, I would till up, I flail mow down what I wanted to get rid of, let it decompose, and then I'd run my tiller through there, add compost, I'd staple and lay all my landscape fabric down on the beds, and then just go through and transplant directly into the landscape fabric. So transplants, over time, I've started transplanting more and more crops and found that that really works well for my farm. But I really struggled with growing my own transplants. One, just getting certified organic materials to be able to create really good potting soil and potting media has been very difficult. I know the easiest, closest thing to find for potting soil for me is ProMix, but I really can't grow very good transplants with that without adding extra fertilizer. But I did try that for a long time. You can see on the screen, I built this propagation greenhouse that is 16 by 24, and did try it. I think growing transplants for me takes a lot of time. I'm not really good at it. You're keeping them watered, making sure mice don't get in there and dig up my seeds and eat them. I had lots of trial and errors with it, and it really stressed me out. And then I would have a really hard time with successions of transplants in the summertime. It might get too hot in there, and I had really bad germination. So over the last few years, I have transitioned to just purchasing all of my transplants from Banner Greenhouse. They're certified organic. I know I can use them. I can plan out all of my plantings for the year, go ahead and order them, and then they just show up, shipped to my house, and I don't have to worry about it. And that has really helped me with my limited amount of labor to be able to really feel like I have control of my farm. And know that I have organic transplants, and I know that they will be good transplants. So that's what I use now. So crop rotation is definitely important in organic farming, and a part of your organic system plan is in record keeping for trying to be certified organic is a lot about crop rotation. And so typically crop rotation is changing where you plant different things in the field. So you're not planting the same crop for maybe at least 3 to 5 years in the same location to reduce your insect and disease pressures in your field. And you can also rotate in a specific order to really help your soil nutrients to benefit the crop that follows another crop. I am honestly not very good at that. I have a hard time strategically planning out this crop should come after this crop for specific nutrient benefits. And part of that is I only have 2 acres and I'm very pressed on space and time every bed needs to be being used. So a lot of time it's trying to fit time wise into certain, is this a 30-day crop or a 60-day crop or a 110-day crop? What can fit in this bed? But I am always making sure that they are not the same type of crop for at least 3 years. And Jenny just put in the chat a resource from Sayre Organic Crop Rotation or Organic Farms, which is something I'm trying to learn a lot more about so I can do that more properly. But these are some examples of real sections of my field over the last year. So last summer, I had a bunch of all my annual cut flower section and section C. And then last fall, I had a whole bunch of kale, arugula, all types of greens that I picked for CSA up till Christmas. And then I left them in the field over winter to act as a cover crop. I flail mowed them down, reshaped those beds, added compost and landscape fabric. And now currently there are peppers growing in that area. And then when those peppers get pulled out, probably around the 1st of October in the fall, I will then broadcast a cover crop on those beds. And the bottom row is another example. Part of section B of my field was the cover crop where I was mowing earlier. Now it is in winter squash. I'm usually harvesting my winter squash at the beginning of September, which is really good timing for me that I'm going to plant strawberries in the end of September in that area. Strawberries get pulled out of my field in June. So then next summer, that area of the field will be some kind of summer crop like okra and probably green beans. I do have 2 high tunnels. Here are some photos from my high tunnels of tomatoes, some lettuce, greens, green beans, and cucumbers. And we will watch a couple of videos that explain more about my high tunnels. This is my #1 high tunnel, my first high tunnel. It was put up in 2015 from a grant from Equip NRCS. I mainly grow tomatoes and greasy beans in my tunnels during the summertime, and then the winter time I'm raising greens. So this year, this is my tomato tunnel. And all of these tomatoes were transplanted into this tunnel the last week of March, 1st of April. I have in some years planted them like mid-March, but I have found that around the 1st of April, they do the best. We're most of the time past really, really cold weather. It's not heated in this tunnel. But we still have cold weather, as you can see. There's some extra plastic laying in here and row covers on the sides. It was cold last night, and this is the end of April. I trellis these on hooks. I do 2 liters per plant, and they hook up onto high tensile wires that are up above me. And I don't usually trellis them up until like the 2nd week of May, just because sometimes it's really cold. In 2020, we had like 22-degree weather in like May 10th, and I already had them trellised, and then I couldn't pull row covers over these hoops. So I'm trying to, unless the plants are really falling over, not start trellising until the middle of May, but I plant them on April 1st. Whatever tunnel I have tomatoes in, I am planting a row of lettuce on either side. That's also planted in the end of March or the 1st of April. And that usually works out pretty well timing wise for me. Those lettuces are usually ready to harvest in early to mid-May before it gets too hot in the tunnel for them, but they aren't really out competing the tomatoes space wise. So I love my high tunnels. I got one from NRCS put up in 2015 and a second one in 2019. And they are wonderful for season extension and really is what I'm harvesting out of the winter with greens. And I think everything just really grows better in them. And it's really nice to have a protected microclimate where you control a little bit more things. I do have rainwater catchment on the tunnels, and my sides are manual roll up sides. And I do have fans. In the last video, there was like one really big fan in the background that I have hooked up now for ventilation. All of my summer crops, the tomatoes and the green beans, before I plant them at the end of March, I am adding a lot of compost onto every bed and forking it with a digging fork as if you would do a broad fork. And then I try not to be tilling for beans or before tomatoes. I'm forking, putting compost down, and then adding drip tape onto the beds. So these beds with the lettuce have 3 rows of drip tape. When I've in the past just done tomatoes with no things on the side of the bed, I've done 2 rows on either side of the tomatoes. And the beans are 2 rows of beans per bed, and they each have a line of drip tape. When I am transitioning to fall and winter crops in September, then I am usually tilling the beds and adding compost sometimes. And in that time of the year, I don't use drip tape in the tunnels. I use overhead mini wobblers, which seems to really cover the entire tunnel pretty well. All right, and then obviously most of my field is outside, and I do have a permanent raised bed system, which you can see a little bit in this photo where some are raised up and you can see the pathways in between. All of my beds are 30 inches wide by 100 feet long with 18-inch pathways, or theoretically they are, but I am not super exact on measuring the beds. They are 100 feet long. So I have a layout of like a grid of blocks of beds, and this section, we're looking at section C, then I have a middle section B and a middle section A, and all of my beds are numbered, which helps me keep track on rotation and what amendments have been added and what's harvested when, etc. in my bed. And I do not have, we'll talk about tools in a moment, a big tractor. I do have a small, like full-size John Deere tractor with a bucket on it, which you may have seen in a photo, but the only thing I use it for in the field is moving compost. And everything else in here is done by hand with hand tools or with a walk-behind tractor, a Grillo. And we only got that full-size tractor with the bucket in 2020. So for the first 6 seasons, we did not have any type of big equipment on the farm. And I talked a little bit about irrigation in the high tunnel, using drip tape in the high tunnel and overhead in the winter. And here is a video of wobbler overhead irrigation in my field. You can see them spinning water out across my beds, and you can kind of see my raised beds with the pathways. And there's some insect netting we'll talk about in a moment. But I started out always using drip tape as my irrigation. That is the way my parents irrigate on their farm, and really what I knew the most about. But I did have some trouble with drip tape, mainly because it took me a long time to get a weed suppression system that worked for me. And so a lot of times my drip tape would get caught in weeds, it would get ripped up. I constantly was having to repair the drip tape or having blowouts at the end of it. And that was very difficult. It also, you know, if you're, in my experience, say, irrigating a row of cucumbers, you can have the row of drip tape next to your cucumbers. But if you're trying to irrigate this direct seeded bed of spinach that is in the picture right here, you have to have a lot of rows of drip tape. And when there's not water in it, the drip tape will kind of bunch up and move around. And so I had a hard time getting very even watering. And so I did move to overhead irrigation. And that has really been nice for me. I have set lines that always stay in the same place in the field. I can just rotate watering around the field. And now I'm getting really good coverage. I am irrigating out here with overhead watering with all municipal water. So I do not feel too scared about food safety with overhead irrigation. And you do have to kind of know what your water pressure is for this, which you can buy a meter that I have. I have a 50 PSI at my water hydrant, but this is about 200 feet away. And I just have a 1-inch orchard tubing pipe that takes it out into the field to all these 100-foot lines, which I already had that equipment from when I used drip tape. It was my drip tape header line, but I would like to upgrade that. And you would probably want to think, if you're going to do overhead irrigation, about having a larger header line for more water pressure. So I spoke a minute ago about my weed suppression system. So that is a systems approach to weed management, which a lot of the NOP guidelines, regulations are about working towards having systems approaches for taking care of your pest, weeds, and disease instead of, spraying or doing really reactive types of things. So I use the landscape fabric, and I also use the stale seeding bag technique really as my system for weed management. So now I know, sometimes I'll till a bed and I'll really say, this spring, I really wanted to plant peas that day. And I'm like, oh, I could just plant peas right now. I'd have them earlier. And I really had to tell myself, you have a system for managing weeds and you need to stick to it, because you will really regret it when you're out there weeding a lot. So in that video a moment ago, where you saw the wobbler irrigation going over those beds of spinach, we were harvesting those today. I've never weeded them. So, that's not always going to be the case. I do have to do some weeding, but trying to do the stale seed bedding with the tarps, with the flame weeder, have really given me a feeling of control over my farm and control over weeds, and made me feel like I can be a farmer and I can grow food. So I really would suggest finding, what system-based approaches will work on your farm. I don't do a ton of intercropping, but it is something I'm getting more interested in. And you can see that I am trying to do that on the sides of my tomatoes. My system for pest and insect management is really using a lot of insect netting in my field, especially over all of my brassica crops, to prevent flea beetle damage, and also like cabbage loopers, all kinds of things. So pretty much as soon as I direct seed a bed of arugula or plant some collard greens or cabbage, I'm immediately putting insect netting over top of those beds. And then I also am scouting for insects to see when they're going to show up. Just last week, I just saw harlequin bugs out on some of my uncovered crops and some cucumber beetles. If I do see a really bad infestation, I will spray OMRI listed insecticide if I really need to, most often pyganic. So I would prefer to use a barrier method with the insect netting, but sometimes, especially like on cucumbers, once they're blooming, I have to take the covers off so they can get pollinated. So then I am doing more scouting and seeing if I really have to spray something or not. And on the right here is my pollinator habitat to attract beneficial insects. Disease management, I guess I'll touch on in a second. I'm mostly choosing varieties of crops. I, over the years have kind of found out what diseases are really bad in my field, and then looking for varieties that are resistant to those diseases. So for instance, I do have a pretty bad southern blight disease problem in my high tunnels. And I have found that using grafted, I use only grafted tomato plants now, and that has really helped me. I've lost an entire tunnel to southern blight before, but that hasn't happened with grafted tomato plants. You know, and I just, it really, a lot of my disease management is choosing correct varieties. So these are some of my essential tools. I do use a Skrilla walk behind tractor. I have the rototiller attachment. I have the rotary plow attachment, which is how I get my raised beds. It also can really plow up hard soil, or if you're really first getting started out and you're trying to, you know, turn a sod field into a vegetable field, rotary plow is awesome. I did, before I farmed full time, I was a site coordinator for Grow Appalachia in Harlan County, and that is what I use to plow people's gardens for them. We already sold the flail mower, which is really essential for my farm. Insect netting, I do use a lot of row covers for season extension. That is them over the strawberries. Shade cloth I use for two different reasons. In this picture in the high tunnel, my husband Will is standing there, and next to him, it's black on the side of the high tunnel. So I found research from Sayer that said you could use shade cloth on the side of your high tunnel to exclude insects. And so I found that works for helping to exclude like bean bugs. I grow a lot of green beans in high tunnels, and I also grow a lot of tomatoes in the summer, and that keeps tomato horn worm moths out of the tunnel. I also use shade cloth over top of crops in the field when I'm planting, transplanting, or even direct seeding anything in really hot weather in the summer. I'll put that shade cloth over top for about 2 weeks. If you leave it on longer than that, the crops will get a bit leggy, but for about 2 weeks will really help your crops get established in the summer, especially in combination with overhead irrigation. So if you have that shade cloth on, another reason I like the overhead irrigation is you can water during the middle of the day and really cool down your crops. So really great for establishing of fall crops that you have to, like broccoli, that you need to plant when it's still really hot outside. And then freezing compost. Yeah, that tractor, we just got it last year, but it's made my life so much easier for moving compost. We dump it right into 3 wheelbarrows right next to the bed we want to go to. And then I also use a lot of hand tools for weeding in the field. A wheel hoe, a stirrup hoe is my favorite. And we use a digging fork for digging up root crops and for broad forking any beds we're not going to till. This is my packing shed, and there's a video where I'm going to give you a tour.
Welcome to my packing shed. I have shade cloth up on 2 sides of the packing shed to keep birds out and give us a little bit of shade in the afternoon sun. This end I close up at night, and then I just pull it open in the daytime when we're working in here. This is my hand washing sink and where I keep my harvest tools. This is a big tank I use for washing a big bunch of stuff or spraying roots on the top, and these are just the tubs from CSA Packup. My triple sink and hose that can fill those sinks. This is my converted washing machine salad spinner. There's 2 baskets in there just for storage, but I just spin with 1 in there. Then I use this table for prepping vegetables to go into the walk-in cooler, which is behind that door. All of our supplies, our whiteboard, and right now we're packing CSAs, but normally all my totes that store stuff in the walk-in cooler are stacked up here after they're cleaned. We're packing CSAs. After a bag is complete, I transport mine in big coolers and say where the pickup is and who's in the cooler for packing them into the van.
Yeah, so I really think, sometimes as for beginning farmers, we get very focused on how do we grow the food and how do we manage weeds, and we maybe don't focus enough on post-harvest handling and how are we washing safely and storing our food and keeping it really high quality from farm to consumer. But having a walk-in cooler, cold storage, and a packing shed where it's honestly one of the very first things that we invested in. This packing shed, is very basic, but it has evolved over time. It wasn't even really quite even this nice at the beginning, but it was something I thought about when I was first starting out. And this is a list of resources that I've used as a beginning farmer a lot. Grow Appalachia for technical assistance, and they also sell supplies like landscape fabric, high tunnels. I've got Omri fertilizer from them, of course, Oak and Transition Trainers, their conference. I've learned all kinds of stuff. I just learned that dump the compost from the tractor bucket into 3 wheelbarrows at this year's Oak conference, and I just blew my mind that I'd never thought of that before. But all these farmers listed are ones I've learned things from their books or following them on social media. And my family, I have to say, I have a little bit of help that I can ask a lot of my siblings and my parents who farm questions. And yeah, if you have any questions for me, I think there's some in the chat we'll get to. And for anyone who is a beginning farmer and thinking about organic certification, I just say, you can do it, and give yourself grace and try to let yourself rest. And why I love farming is you're always learning. So you're always going to change your methods and move to being a better farmer, a better steward of your land, and, complying with organic standards a little bit better every year.
Awesome advice. Thanks, Maggie, so much for sharing so much of that with us. We will continue to take questions into the chat, and we're going to have a little Q&A with Maggie, a little back and forth. Wanted to share her contact information as well as her website, which will both be in that PDF that we share with you following up. So you'll get it sometime later this week. And contacts for our program and all things Oak, you can contact Brooke. To our farmer education, you can contact me, Jenny, and of course our website will also be available there. And we're also going to share with you another big broad list of resources like the ones Maggie shared with you, but these specific to organic production. So all of these will have active links. Several of them Maggie mentioned throughout the past several minutes. Some of them are Kentucky specific fodder, but you won't go wrong with this list of resources towards organic certification or growing in that with those methods in general. And so please keep those questions coming. We are going to get Maggie's response to a bunch of them. And we're also going to share in the chat a survey link. I'm not sure if I spelled it out really earlier as much as I intend to, that all of our field days and our farmer education programming is based on feedback we get from our audience. And so we really do count on you, our audience, our community of farmers and allied professionals, to let us know what you think of our programming and what you're looking for in our programming. So here's a SurveyMonkey link a couple times there that you can give us some feedback, and we'll shift towards Q&A. All right, so Maggie, again, thank you. I know some of these questions were shared through registration, and a couple of them you did address, but I wanted to ask all the way back to the beginning. People are asking about your land and if you had to acquire capital for purchasing that. Or briefly mention that, but maybe you could expand on that a little more.
Yeah, so I don't know that my experience is going to be super helpful for anyone else with that. But we really had just saved up money to purchase our land. So that's not going to be probably most people's situation. And the land we found as well was actually land that my husband had looked at like 7 years before, and it's an involved story, but the people couldn't sell it. Then they could sell it. They called him back and said, "Hey, are you still interested in that property you looked at 7 years ago?" And Will was like, "Yeah, sure." And then we went and looked at it, and the timing really just worked out that was like a time where we had been dating really long enough and we're deciding that we were maybe going to look for property. So it really, we were very, very lucky in timing and kind of working for a lot of years and having housing situations where we were able to save money. We were very lucky. I can't give any advice about that. I'm very sorry.
Well, I would say persistence and
Yes.
just setting
Patience.
an intention and heading that direction. Yeah, and patience, always
Yeah.
patience, right? So with your certification, I know that Christy has been curious whether you are certifying all of your farm, every bit of it, or a portion of it. And we can kind of talk a little bit about how that works out with the regulations as well.
Yeah, so we are only planning to certify that 2 acres that's inside of my deer fence that I'm growing vegetables on. And not our pastures. We're not actually doing anything that couldn't be certified in our pastures, but I am farming with other people that have other enterprises and different opinions about what can be done with the land or feeling restricted for future use of them. So we're right now only trying to certify those 2 acres, and Jenny can maybe talk a little bit about doing that. I think I know how that would work out, but I'm not yet certified. So, I haven't had someone come inspect me and really grill me on how we are managing that.
Right. Yeah. And in general, I know when we talked about this earlier, you talked about, for example, a tractor cleaning log as part of your record keeping. So that tractor, if you're using it on a split operation, as it's often referred to, both an organic and a conventional operation, if you're using it on both, you do have to make sure that you're identifying, is that coming into contact with substances or land that is not certified organic? And if so, you are keeping records and spelling out in your record keeping how you are preventing any contamination to the organic land or products. And in general, from the NOP handbook, their guidance recommends that you just need to identify and address any of those places of commingling where contamination risk is possible. And they call those organic control points. So it could be tractors, it could be storage areas, and it's just farm to farm specific, as is the organic system plan for every farm. And those types of things, a transition trainer or your certifier can talk to you about where those organic contact points, control points rather, may be offering a little more risk that you need to pay attention to and keep records on. Clear as mud, right? So with your soil, I was looking to see if there was something more. You mentioned doing soil tests, and how often are you doing those, and where are you getting those done?
So I'm doing them every year, but I'm only just doing them through my county extension agent. So I haven't been doing any really nice fancy ones, which I probably would like to maybe start doing, but I've just been doing pretty basic ones through the county extension office.
Well, yeah, and we're lucky throughout Kentucky to have those county by county resources for those soil tests. Have you learned or seen anything through the years of doing those that you're shifting any of your results with your practices?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen, especially areas of the field that have got compost repeatedly, that, I have better organic matter. I also don't need, my potassium and phosphorus levels are pretty good. And my pH is a lot higher because I have a really bad problem with having really low pH in my field, but the areas that have been composted a lot are, just with the compost, even just a lot closer to 7 than the other parts of my field.
You mentioned you're using municipal water, and Christy also had some questions about in your high tunnels, you've got water catchment. And whether if that gets into organic certification issues or food safety issues with using that water catchment water.
So I'm honestly not using it. So, getting the pumps and hooking that up is part of getting NRCS tunnels. But I actually have it diverted so that it flows out into the ditch. So I'm more using it as a way to not get water flooded into my tunnels. And I might at some point irrigate with it. I don't believe, I could be definitely wrong, I don't believe that would be against organic standards to be using water that's caught. I'm mostly not doing it because I do a lot of overhead irrigation and I don't want to use surface water for overhead irrigation. But in my tunnels, I do use drip tape for summer crops. So I think that I could use that in there with no problem for organic standards, Jenny.
Not that I'm aware of. I'll defer to Brooke if there's any further info on that.
It cut out there. Restate the question?
Just as far as roof runoff water catchment, if there's any concern for that. I know with food safety, there have been some questions on that.
Only with food safety, it depends what you're using it for, right? And what you're putting it on. And so just water testing in that regard, but not specific to the NOP. It's more FSMA related.
And there had been a question about your organic transplants and where you're getting those from. Can you repeat that for us?
Yes, Banner greenhouses, and they're in North Carolina.
Yeah. And all of their transplants are OMRI certified, so those would fit within organic certification.
They do have some that are not, that are flowers, but it's very clearly labeled on their website. Everything on there is OMRI certified organic unless it says not organic, like in giant letters. So you should not get mixed up if you're on their website.
Yeah.
And
well, thanks again.
Can I jump in just with Banner Greenhouse? They do offer hub distribution points, so you can save on shipping depending on when you need transplants and what the delivery cycle is. So it's worth reaching out to Banner Greenhouse to see what their Kentucky delivery dates are if you're interested in that.
Nice, thanks, Brooke. And thanks so much to you, Maggie. We really appreciate you taking so much time over several weeks to put together with us and taking time away from your harvest day today. We're grateful, and we're grateful to all of you for joining us here today. Thanks very much, and we hope to see you at a future field day.
Thank you all.
Everybody.